So former Republican House Speaker and board member of the Fox Corporation, Paul Ryan, appeared on Fox News earlier this week and, drumroll please, criticized Donald Trump for calling him unfit for office.
It's going to be a very, very close race. I think they're terrible choices that we're being presented with. And that's just the fate of that's what the primary voters selected. And I regret the fact that that's where we are.
All right. Now, I know a lot of these folks who also shared your same concerns about Donald Trump have sort of said, all right, we're rallying around Donald Trump. You had said, though, that would not be the case with you. You had said that he's a populist and an authoritarian narcissist, that character is too important to me, and it's a job that requires the kind of character he just doesn't have. That's pretty strong.
Yeah, that's the way I feel. I agree with that. I don't support Biden either. I think his policies are terrible. I hate the fact that I feel like I got to write in a Republican like I did the last time in 2020. I voted for him in 2016, hoping that there was going to be a different kind of person in office. And I do think character is a really important issue. If you put yourself above the Constitution, as he has done.
But what happened?
I think that makes you unfit for office.
Was it the whole January 6th thing?
That's a part of it. I think it's a contribution of factors, but I think it really is just character at the end of the day. And the fact that if you're willing to put yourself above the Constitution, an oath you swear when you take office, in federal office, whether it's president or a member of Congress, you swear an oath to the Constitution. And if you're willing to suborn it to yourself, I think that makes you unfit for office.
Let's bring in MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle, the host of the podcast On Brand with Donnie Deutsch. Donnie Deutsch, editor of the nonpartisan group Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter, and former U.S. attorney and MSNBC contributor Barbara McQuade. She's the author of an extraordinarily important book every American should read if they want to know what's going on right now. Attack from Within. How disinformation is sabotaging America. And by the way, it makes a wonderful Father's Day gift. Willie, I've known Paul for a very long time. He worked for a group of us when I first got to Washington, and I love the guy. I really do. I mean, he's a wonderful guy, a wonderful man, and I'm so glad he's speaking out. I think he's on the Fox board or the News Corp board. He's on one of the boards. So he's in a position of authority over there, and that's not something a lot of people would do. Just to speak out like that. So I appreciate that. I will say the thing I don't understand is understanding that this guy's an authoritarian, understanding the dangers that he presents, and then saying, well, I can't stand Joe Biden either, and I'm going to vote for, I hate his policies, I'm going to just write in a vote. Well, if you feel like democracy's on the line, if you feel there's an authoritarian waiting, really what is so offensive about voting for a man who's presided over the strongest economy in the world, an economy that the World Bank yesterday said is fueling the world's economy, the Dow's at over 40,000. We've never been stronger economically relative to the rest of the world since 1945. Our military's relative to the rest of the world never been stronger than it is today either. I'm grateful that Republicans like Paul Ryan are not voting for Donald Trump, actually proving they actually believe what they've been saying their whole life, and that will be enough to defeat Donald Trump. I just wonder how you can say he's an authoritarian, he's a threat to American democracy, he doesn't have the character to be president, but I'm not going to vote against the one guy, but I'm not going to vote for the one guy that can keep him out of office.
Yeah, there's even among Donald Trump's critics within the party, within the conservative movement, there's always a yes, but sort of equivocating in some way that Joe Biden is equally bad in his own right. You know, that criticism from Paul Ryan, certainly not the first time he's criticized Donald Trump, was relatively mild. It was substantive. I didn't think he was out there throwing bombs. I think some of the points were pretty obvious to most people who watch politics. And for that, Trump-supporting members of Congress in the House, one of them called Paul Ryan a piece of garbage for the comments you just heard there, and said he is not a real conservative if he doesn't support
just the opposite.
Donald Trump.
So what,
Paul Ryan,
conservatives are liars?
Conservatives? Yeah, just the opposite, Willie. Paul Ryan, one of the most conservative guys I worked with in Congress. I mean, here was our big difference was he was a tax cut, I think, at all costs guy. And I was about balancing the budget, bringing down the national debt. And we talked about this, but we were both conservatives. We were just sort of in different wings. We were both economic conservatives. We were just focused on two different things. But nobody that worked with Paul would ever say he wasn't a conservative. And yet, anybody that saw what Donald Trump while he was president, raising the national debt more over his 4 years than any president in U.S. history.
Yeah, I mean, it's laughable. Amanda Carpenter, people who are actually real conservatives now, because the window has shifted so much under Donald Trump. And as we were talking about in our last hour, that Donald Trump will be up on Capitol Hill today, and he will be followed through the halls by all those members of Congress who want to be seen with him, who want to kiss the ring, who want to take a picture with him for their campaign ads, all of that, who call themselves conservatives, and yet they're just following a man, not really even an ideology, a theory of economics or politics or anything else.
Yeah, you know, I wish in these interviews that Paul Ryan does, he could get to a place to actually talk about why he isn't the House Speaker anymore. I mean, it is good that he says that Donald Trump is unfit for office. And he's been saying this numerous times, you know, over the years in various interviews. It's notable that he said it on Fox. Also notable that that interview was confined to the 4 p.m. hour, because I don't think that Paul Ryan would be welcome to be saying those words in the primetime hours where the majority of Fox News listeners are really reached. And so, you know, what is frustrating about this is that Ryan and other Republicans that take this position, I think they're expecting people to read between the lines way too much. I think they tell themselves that if I go out and say he's unfit, but I can't vote for Biden, and somehow, you know, I am saying the words that I think Donald Trump is authoritarian. I'm saying the words that I think he's dangerous. And then if I say I don't like Joe Biden's policies, like, other people are expected to give me credit and do the work there. I'm sorry, that is not enough. Paul Ryan needs to talk about, there is a reason why I'm not the Speaker of the House anymore. My views are being pushed out of the party. We are not a big tent party right now because Donald Trump expects Republicans in any position of power, whether you're the House Speaker, whether you're a Senate Republican, to act as his legal and political shield. That is why Donald Trump is going to the Hill today. He can say, his campaign aides can say they're going to talk about his legislative agenda. We already see what that looks like with these endless investigations to nowhere that have been led by House Republicans into the Biden family, into Merrick Garland. I mean, this is where this is going. This is how he wants the party to act as his shield. That is the reason Paul Ryan isn't there anymore. And, you know, also, it's good that there are other Senate Republicans who won't take that meeting, but they're saying, oh, it's a scheduling conflict. Why don't you come out and say, I am not going to meet with someone who is practically and morally responsible, in the words of Senate, Mitch McConnell, for sending a mob to the Capitol and stopping the peaceful transfer of power. I mean, we need to start saying it very plainly, very clearly, in ways that are unmistakable, because there is a faction of Republicans who are not going to go along with this. They're not successful, obviously, in stopping Trump from becoming the Republican nominee once again for the third presidential election in a row. But they need to be vocal and make it known that they are there. And that is the only way that we're going to grow that Republican resistance that will be responsible for having any chance of making the party responsible again.